Welcome to the in-between,
where shift happens,
the moment between where we are
and where we are going.
We will ask all the questions,
maybe find some answers,
and generally work at being okay.
In the mystery of the in-between.
And today's episode, season 4, episode 1, whoop whoop, we are talking about being in relationship to the world around us and what that actually means and what that actually looks like and how do we do it and like all the things, everything in between all of that. Easy peasy conversation.
Yeah.
So if you're just joining us, if you've never joined us for an in-between podcast, the idea, well, welcome first of all. And the idea behind this podcast is we come with a agreed upon topic, and we have one person has questions related to said topic, but the other person doesn't have any kind of knowledge of those questions, and then we just kind of experience the rawness of the answers. The in-between, right, is where life happens. So this is what we're doing today, talking about being in relationship to the world around us. So everyone stretch out a little bit, get ready, stretch your brain muscles, and get ready for this conversation, because I think it's an important one. No matter what time we live in, I think this is an important one, but especially for the time in which we are currently living. Mm-hmm. So Daniel, are you ready?
I suppose I am ready as I'm going to be. Here we go.
All right. So, well, let's start at the beginning. Like, what does it mean to be in relationship to the world around us? And we talk about being in relationship. Like, what is that? Like, kind of like the definition of what that looks like. And I think it probably can look like lots of things, but let's get the ball started and then we'll go from there. So let's start there.
Yeah. Well, definitely lots of things. Oh my God. What comes up first, like immediately for me is, I think we probably talk about this a lot, like from different perspectives, but maybe never really like right on the head of the idea. Right. Mm-hmm. But this is like, what's the thing we're always talking about in all the other ways. Right. But it's like, none of us live in a vacuum. Right. So we are so interconnected with the rest of the world, whether we want to be or not.
Right.
And I think we're realizing that, like collectively, we're realizing that more and more in our current state of affairs in the world, right? Like more and more things are happening that are affecting huge groups of people that have like a domino effect. So where I think there were large enough groups of people in the past that something would happen far off over there and it wouldn't really affect me. And so whatever, like, oh, that's awful. Okay, I'm going to move on and, go back to reading the newspaper or whatever.
Right.
But now I think more and more things are happening that directly impact more and more of us. Like, oh man, that thing over there that's happening is directly impacting me. I can't not see it. I can't not feel it. I can't not be experiencing this thing in real time.
Yeah.
That it's almost like we're in a way being like forced to recognize that interconnectedness that exists, that I don't know, have we collectively chosen to ignore? Has it been learned out of us, taught out of us? Is it just culturally, for most of us in the United States, it's just not something that's been focused on? I don't know, but I think for me, the big picture is like, none of us live in a vacuum, right? We're all breathing the same air. We're living on the same land. We're drinking the same water. We're absorbing the same sunlight. You know what I mean? Like we are all the same thing. And I don't think we can ignore it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, what comes up for me, like all of that. And what also comes up for me is the understanding that relationship is an active word. And so it is not a static word. So, recognizing our interconnectedness. Yes, that's the first step in that. And what is the activity that relationship is calling for me to be involved in this moment, or for any of us to be
Mm.
involved in, right? Because I think that we can understand our interconnectedness and we can see the things that are going on around us, but to be in relationship to things or people is to give an aspect, right? An aspect of ourselves in that, our activity, our energy, um, together, right?
Yeah.
Collectively towards something. And so I think for me, and I think for a lot of people, whether you're in a spiritual community or not, I think now more than ever we are called to actually put action to the words of what it means to be in relationship to things and to people. And I think what that
Mm.
often requires of us is to not stay the same, is to
Yeah.
change,
Yeah.
right? Because that is, as Octavia said, the only lasting truth is change. Um, and so being part of that change, being part of that activity, um, being in relationship, asking questions, leaning in, not assuming I know what someone or something needs, but
Yeah.
to really begin to cultivate a relationship to that thing or that organization or that person. And then what is my role in that relationship now?
Yeah.
Um, I think also relationship also means accountability to and for each other. Um, that's what comes up for me. It's like it's an activity.
Yeah.
Like that relationship is not a static thing. And I think sometimes um, we would love for things like that to be static because that means I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It
I
seems
wish you would change in the relationship, right? But I don't want to have
right.
to change.
Yeah, exactly. Everything else should change, but not me.
Right. Which
Certainly
is a
something.
colonizer. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
colonizer mindset,
Yeah.
right? Everything else
Yeah.
changes but me, right?
Right. Right. It feels like the difference between sympathy and empathy,
Mm.
right? Like what a privilege it is to be able to have sympathy for others. And hello, look how, high moral I am or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look what's happening to them. That's so awful.
For you.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. And it looks, I don't know, I'll say right. It looks correct. It looks proper. It looks like you're a good person. And like, I mean, and if sympathy is all you got and that's where you're at, like, all right, you know. And I think we're being pushed past that where empathy requires us to be like in the trenches and be with the people, with each other,
Yeah.
going through whatever we're going through, because we're really not separate from somebody else going through something else. Like
Which
we
is
are in
scary.
some way
Yeah.
interconnected with that thing that is happening and that we are all going through and experiencing, whether it's from this vantage point or that vantage point.
Yeah.
We are all in the trenches of life that's happening around us.
Well, empathy is a scary thing. And I'll say this, it's scary because, an attribute of empathy is this ability to recognize emotion in someone else. And so what that means, long and
Hmm.
short, is that I can see an emotion that you're having. I can recognize an emotion, and then I can go inward and recognize a time in my life when I've had the same emotion. And
Please don't
sometimes
make me do that.
yeah, I mean, that's uncomfortable, that's scary.
Yeah.
That is connecting us maybe to things that we haven't, processed, or things that we've, chosen not to look at for whatever reason, which is fine as well. And so empathy can be scary in this day and age, but I think it is a necessary component to what it means to be in relationship
Yeah.
to the world around us, because I think it cracks us open in a way um, that all we can do is lean into the thing, right? We can no longer avoid the reality of things. We have to lean into it and lean in to what it means to be in community with one another.
Yeah. And isn't that a huge part of the change that is probably going on, or almost definitely going on, right? Is like, I think for many people, emotions, if named at all, were a private thing.
Right.
Like, I'm not gonna express or experience my emotions with you, right? I mean, I think back to how I was raised, how my parents were raised, how
Right.
the stories that they told us about how they were raised, and like emotions were not a thing you were allowed to have, let alone talk about or experience out loud. Like, don't make anyone else feel uncomfortable, you know. Don't put that on them, or really, don't put your emotions on me, kind of thing. Like, don't force me to feel anything, you
Right.
know. But I think that is widely changing.
Oh, absolutely. Because I think that's
And
it's a generational
yeah,
sort of thing. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Um, and so that's becoming more and more common for people to be expecting conversation, expecting dialogue, expecting interaction, and the real interconnection of that experience. Like, emotions are not a private thing. They're not something you have on your own, and they're not separate from the experience that you and I are having together, right? And so I'm not going to make you responsible for my emotions, and for us to better understand ourselves and each other and the experience that we're having, it benefits both of us to have that conversation, right? To really go and like, hey, this is what happened. This is what I experienced. This is what I'm feeling. To to really to see each other, to know each other, um, and I think ultimately to to better be in relationship with the world around us.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I
Which kind of
think
makes me question, like, how do we, like, that at some point that feels like such an obvious goal, to want to be in better relationship with the world around us, but I don't know, like, what is the motivation or the meaning or the whatever behind that, like, it seems so obvious, but is that like an inherent, like, human thing, that do we just naturally get to that point where we're like, oh yeah, that's obviously part of what moves us.
well, and I think it is inherent, like, in our DNA to want to do that, to want to come together and whatnot. And, I read somewhere, and I think also inherent is to support, is to uplift, is to
Mm,
help.
yeah,
I read
yeah.
somewhere it was like they did this research with, like, children and small children, where, like, an adult walked by and dropped something, and the child immediately went up, picked it up, and handed it to the adult, right? So it was like this instinct
Yeah.
to help, and to
Mm,
support and to, like, right, and I know
yeah.
that that's a very simplistic sort of explanation of probably what was a very complex research project, but, uh, for our purposes here,
Yeah.
it was just supporting this idea that I think those things aren't innate, and I think what happens, and I can speak for me, and I think I can probably speak for other folks, but I will just speak for me too. I think sometimes what gets in the way of being in relationship to, like, anything is fear.
Mm, yeah.
It's fear. I don't know, for me, sometimes it's like worthiness. It's like all the things, right? And so
Yeah.
those things kind of get layered on us and impact our ability to be in a relationship, or impact our ability to even see outside of our own
Yeah.
um, awareness. And so I think this activity of being in relationship to the world around us, whether that's just in one-on-one relationships, or relationships we have in groups, or our responsibilities as citizens of countries, and all the things, right? All, like, from, top to bottom,
Yeah.
is the need to continually to look at what is underneath, right? Like, just
Mm,
continue to look at our, whether it's our default ways of being, our biases, our understandings, our projections, like all the things,
yeah.
because all of those things directly impact our ability and our level of relationship to things. And so we bring certain things to relationships, just like, you bring baggage from past
Yeah.
relationships to the current, right?
Yeah.
And to recognize when we're acting out of those things, right? And to be really honest about that. And I think, and this is stuff that we talk about, and I think this is easy talked about in this big sort of 35,000 feet view. But I think that
Yeah.
we can do all the things, our own work, as much as possible. And still there are systems and frameworks that actively work against our ability
Mhm.
to be in a relationship in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I think that what is being called to now is a greater awareness of that and a greater involvement in the activity of dismantling those um, barriers to this innate understanding of what it means to be in relationship to the world around us. And that's, the earth, people, like the environment, nature, like all the things. I mean, there's so many things that sometimes work in opposition to being in relationship with those things.
Yeah. And I think I don't know if this is kind of bringing it full circle. I think it's really easy to feel separate from some of those or all of those or any of those systems and frameworks when they're not like in our face
Yeah.
all the time. Or when they're so in our face that we're like buried in trying to get by that we don't even see them. Right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I don't know. We need to go into all kinds of details about it, but I think it's really easy to feel, and maybe that's the point of some of them. I don't know that all of those systems are accidental, right? Like, I think some of the point of them might be to keep us so buried in them that we don't realize how directly impacted we all are by them, um, or to recognize how directly impacted some of us are by them
Mm,
that it feels like there's nothing to do, nothing we
mm,
can do. And I think, just like you're saying, that there is something we can do, whether it's small or big. I think it's action, it's connection, it's realizing that it's a system and a framework, that it's not actually how the world moves and operates, right? Like, it's something that we created as people and got put in place, and so we don't have to buy into it, we don't have to agree with it. We can just kind of like start making incremental changes in
mhm.
how we interact with each other, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know. I mean, things we've talked about, like, taking a nap is rebellious, right? In the grind culture, like, take a nap or go help your neighbor with, I don't know, whatever it is they're doing, right? Like, go connect with somebody, or any of the like infinite possibilities of how we can go out and connect in ways that maybe we haven't before, because it creates change,
Yeah.
right?
And I think we get stuck. Well, and you read my mind because that was gonna be the question. What are some practical examples of but, I think, what you said is, like, it doesn't have to be like these, it can be very incrementally small things that actually, cultivate these relationships, and I think sometimes we get stuck because we think it has to look this certain way. We have to go and, protest here, we have to be involved in this big civic organization, or we have to do, you know, be a leader in this community, or all the things. And that may very well be true for a lot of us, but that's not true for everyone. And there's no amount of action, there's no like hierarchy in action in
Mm,
this idea of being in a relationship and moving into that and leaning into that. And I think sometimes we think that, and we're like, well, I don't have the bandwidth to do those big things. So I'm just going to just not do anything. And
mm,
we can get paralyzed by the enormity, I think that's a word,
yeah.
of the situation. And so I think exactly what you're saying. It's like, what can I do today to lean into a relationship? And maybe it's just a relationship with someone in your house, right? What can I look at today that or look at in that relationship where maybe I can show up in a way that I want to instead of the way that I normally do, right? And begin to make those little shifts, and then that just, it does ripple out. And I think that speaks to like exactly what you talked at the very beginning, our interconnectedness, and so that we understand that any action is creates change.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
does. I mean, that's
It
just the
has
way
to be,
things
right?
work, right? Whether it's change that we're like, "Yay," or change we're like, "Uh-oh," right? It's like like any action creates that, and so I think that just, and when we understand that, boy, does that shift the things that we do and the decisions we make, right? Because if
Yeah.
I know that my decision directly impacts people, then I'll be hopefully more inclined to be more intentional and thoughtful of those actions and words and the things that I support, the things I buy, the things I put my money towards. Like when we really kind of get that, then I think that it really opens our eyes to the actual things that we can do to cultivate that relationship in a way that supports all of us.
Yeah.
So it is like the circular sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea that no action, like there's no hierarchy in what was the word you said? I don't remember. There's no hierarchy in activity, right? Like one action is not better or bigger than another one, even if it seems like it, even if I think it is. This action is not better than that action.
Right.
That they're all impactful. And anything that takes us out of our bubble, I think that's what I'm realizing is like,
oh yeah,
the way, I don't know, at least the way I was raised, that the world I was raised in isolates us, puts us in a bubble. You exist in your own bubble, and you're responsible for creating your reality and all of the things that go with it. And if you can't or don't, then you're not enough. You didn't make it. You're not blah, 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 whatever. So any activity that gets us out of that little bubble is like hugely impactful and rebellious and forward moving. I mean,
and I think that's a cumulative effect too, right? It just kind of gets us moving in a direction.
Yeah.
And I think the long and short of it too is that we're in relationship to the world around us, whether we want to be or not.
Yeah.
Right? That everything that we are doing, like even like this podcast and you know, and the relationships we have and the I don't know, like the technology that we have, the things that we use in our home, all those have been dependent on other people, and we have a relationship to those things, right? And so it's very interesting that we are, and I think that the work too is to recognize that and like, oh, okay, where are there areas where I can be more integrity with those relationships?
Yeah.
And I think that is also the work too. Where can I show up in ways that align with my values, and I'll allow that to inform the way I cultivate and nurture the relationships to the world around us, whether it's to the environment, to family, friends, people, coworkers, like all the things.
Well,
and so yes, well, you heard it here, folks. You heard it here, right? And so this is like most things we talk about. It is like this ongoing like process and evolution, and you know, sometimes it brings more questions than answers, and I think that's okay. Actually, I think the answer is quite often always in the question. And are continuing to ask the questions, and then the next question, right? And by then we're on a roll, like kind of oozing in the activity of what it means to do all of these things. And so, yay! Well, yeah, I mean, y'all have participated at least in some of the questions, and maybe it's generated some questions of your own. So we're always encouraged to interact with us here on the podcast and put your questions up, and who knows, maybe there'll be a subject of a future podcast. So thank you for joining us here. Daniel, thank you as always for being a willing participant. And so we hope that you've kind of gotten a little bit comfortable with this conversation of the in-between, knowing that is where life happens, standing in the questions. And so until next time, we hope maybe a little shift happens.
Just a little.
Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between.
But thanks for being here anyway.
We may not have found all the answers,
But certainly some. And maybe more importantly,
a little shift has happened.
and the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between.
So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.